cracking open a detective story. But the crime scene, it's inside the human brain. We're going to follow the clues just like scientists did, down a path that seemed obvious, only to find a huge plot twist. All right, let's jump right in. So, for what feels like forever, the amygdala got this reputation as the brain's panic button, right? The fear center. But what if I told you that's just the first chapter? Turns out it's a key suspect in a much bigger mystery, one that gets to the very heart of how we connect with each other. Okay, so every good investigation needs a prime suspect. Let's get ours on the board. This is the amygdala. And look, it's not just one thing. It's this little almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep inside your brain. For decades, its entire rap sheet was built around one single thing: fear. I mean, think about those classic Pavlov's dog experiments, but for fear. You know, a bell rings, you get a little shock. Pretty soon, just hearing the bell makes you jump. Well, the amygdala is the part of your brain making that connection happen. It's why a certain sound or sight can make your heart race. And that's how it got its famous nickname, the fear center. But spoiler alert, that name is, well, it's a little misleading. And this is where the plot really starts to thicken. Scientists started to wonder, okay, what else does this thing do? They shifted their focus away from just fear and into the super complex world of social behavior, and they found something really interesting. They saw that some of the social challenges people with autism face looked kind of similar to behaviors in people who had actual physical damage to their amygdala, and that was our first big clue. And from that clue, this really powerful, almost elegant idea was born. They called it the amygdala theory of autism. The whole idea was, what if this one tiny part of the brain was the key, the master key to understanding the social challenges that come with autism? And for a while, the case against the amygdala just kept getting stronger. It all started back in the late 80s with some of the first brain scans. Then, boom, in 2000, the theory gets its official name. And for the next 10 years, study after study using fMRI seemed to back it up, showing that, yeah, the amygdala does seem to activate differently in people with autism, especially during social situations. You can see why this theory was so appealing, right? It was just neat. It made sense. If the amygdala is all about processing social cues, like looking at someone's face and figuring out if they're happy or sad, then it stands to reason that if it works a little differently, that could explain why social stuff can be so tricky for some people. It felt like the case was closed, a perfect fit. But you know how it goes in any good detective story? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, a new piece of evidence comes to light. And when scientists really started to grill this theory, to put it under some serious pressure, it started to crack. Some major holes started to show up. The way they tested it was absolutely brilliant. They set up a direct comparison. They took one group of people with autism and another group of patients who, and this is key, had very specific damage or lesions only to their amygdala. The logic was simple. If the amygdala is the whole story, these two groups should behave almost identically on social tests, right? Well, here's the thing. The results were messy. It wasn't a clean match. I mean, sure, in some ways they were similar. Both groups paid less attention to people's eyes when trying to read emotions. Both had a tough time judging if a face looked trustworthy. So, check, that fits the theory. But on other really important social tasks, their behavior was totally different. The story wasn't adding up.
This chart really lays out the puzzle perfectly. Just look at that row for modulating attention. When asked to, the patients with amygdala damage could change where they were looking to gather social info, but the group with autism did not. See the problem? The simple theory could explain some things, but it totally failed to explain these big differences. The case was falling apart.
And then came the smoking gun, the final nail in the coffin for the simple theory. Researchers gave the patients with only amygdala damage the gold standard clinical test for autism. So how many of them actually met the diagnostic criteria? You're looking at the number right there. 0, a big fat 0. Not a single one. That's huge. It means that damage to the amygdala all by itself does not cause autism. Case closed on that theory.
So this is where our detective story takes a massive plot twist. Our prime suspect, the amygdala, it didn't act alone. It turns out the investigators were looking at the wrong thing. They shouldn't have been looking for a single culprit, but for a whole network of accomplices.
And it makes so much sense when you think about it. As the scientists themselves say, something as complex as autism isn't likely to come down to just one little part of the brain. The real problem probably isn't the amygdala itself, but the connections, the way it's talking or maybe not talking with all the other regions it's supposed to be working with.
This leads us to this really key idea called functional connectivity. The best way to think about it is like a team working on a big project. It doesn't matter how brilliant each person is individually if they can't communicate. That's functional connectivity. It's the crosstalk between brain regions. And in the brain, that communication, it's literally everything.
So, who's the amygdala's main partner in crime? Well, when it comes to social stuff, its number one collaborator is the prefrontal cortex. You can think of the PFC as the brain's CEO. It's the part that handles planning, context, and making the big decisions. And these two, they're supposed to be in constant contact, a non-stop feedback loop. Okay, so how do we actually see this partnership in action? Well, there's this fantastic experiment called the Iowa gambling task. It's basically a card game designed to be like real life. You've got risk, you've got reward, and you have to learn from your wins and losses to do well.
All right, this is so cool. This breaks down how your brain makes what we call a gut decision. Let's walk through it. So step 1, you pick a card deck. Step 2, you see what happens. You win or lose money. Now pay attention to step 3. That's the amygdala's job. It instantly creates an emotional tag for that outcome, like a little somatic marker. Later on, step 4, when you're thinking about picking from that deck again, your prefrontal cortex goes, hey, what was the feeling last time? And it pulls up that emotional tag. That feeling you get right then, that's your gut feeling, telling you whether to go for it or stay away.
And this explains exactly why patients with amygdala damage do so poorly on this test. Their communication network is broken right at step 3. The amygdala never creates that emotional tag in the first place. So when the prefrontal cortex tries to check for a gut feeling, it finds nothing. There's no signal. And without that feedback, they just can't learn from their mistakes, and they keep making bad, risky choices. So you see how this just completely changes the game, right? We've gone from looking at one tiny spot under a microscope to having to map this huge, interconnected superhighway. The new mystery isn't what's wrong with the amygdala. It's how is the entire communication network of the social brain wired. And to crack this case, scientists are bringing out the big guns. I'm talking about an absolutely incredible new set of tools. They're layering different kinds of brain scans on top of each other, using AI and machine learning to find patterns a human could never spot. And get this, they're even able to record signals from single neurons in patients who volunteer during brain surgery. This is like a whole new frontier of neuroscience. So our detective story doesn't end with a neat case closed. Instead, we're left with this deep appreciation for just how complex this all is. We started with one lone suspect, the amygdala, only to find out it was just one player in a massive, ever-changing network. It's such a great reminder that when it comes to the brain, it's almost never about one single part. It's about how all the parts talk to each other. And that leaves us with the biggest, most exciting question you could ask. Just what are we going to find when we can finally see the map of the